Where are we meeting the men that don't suck? Where are we finding them?
Where are all the good men?
Where are all the good men at?
Where have all the good men gone?
Where are all the good men?
Where do I find the nice guy that wants a simple, healthy relationship?
Where are the good men at? Where they at? How do I meet them? Where do I go?
Girls, where the fuck are you finding good men?
You say you want a good man, but ask yourself this. Would the man that you want the woman that you've become? 63% of men under the age of 30 are single, but that's not the whole story. In fact, 61% of men ages 18 to 29 say they want to be in a committed relationship, compared to only 50% of women. Yet everywhere we turn, there's a woman who's asking, why does it feel like there are no good men left? Maybe it's not that they're gone. Maybe they're just done with the rules of a rigged game. This video is for the women who want a good man, who may not even be aware of the pitfalls of their own perceptions, beliefs, and behaviors that push good men away instead of pulling them in. And this video is for the men who are overburdened with the dialogue that their masculinity is somehow toxic, that we don't need them, when in fact, we do. This is for those of you who believe in commitment, love, and the depth of what is real over what just feels good right now. And to be transparent, this won't be an easy video, and I will be the first to admit that I don't have this all figured out. However, I do believe that there are fundamental flaws that have eroded the very fabric of relationships. And by the time you watch this video all the way to the end, you'll understand exactly how we got here, and how the things that you believe are in your best interest may in fact be harming you. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. It started as a fight for rights, and it morphed into a war on roles. And now, it's a religion without redemption. This book is one that I recommend everybody reads. It reveals the esoteric and spiritual roots of feminism as rebellion. And not just against men, but against nature and order itself. In the effort to see this from an alternative perspective to the narrative that you have probably been fed about feminism, I ask you to keep an open mind to what I'm about to share with you. I'm going to dive into each wave and show you how this movement has shifted drastically, potentially radically, over time. There are many narratives and beliefs held that feminism is either the best thing that has ever happened or the absolute worst. But unlike other waves that came, the first wave of feminism was focused on maintaining the order and nurture between men and women. The pioneers in this first wave, like Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Stanton, and Sojourner Truth, framed their arguments not in terms of overthrowing the patriarchy or embracing this spiritual rebellion, but in terms of moral responsibility, justice, and civic duty. Many were abolitionists and temperance advocates, campaigning against things like slavery, domestic abuse, and alcohol abuse, which were destroying families. And I personally see this as an era where women were fighting for family, for order, not against it. First wave feminists sought basic legal protection and recognition, the right to vote, property rights for married women, access to education, and legal recourse in abusive marriages. These demands were not about erasing sex-based differences, but about correcting clear injustices, ones that left women legally voiceless and financially trapped. These reforms aligned with natural law and biblical principles of justice, not oriented towards social upheaval. Now, I want to be clear that my positions are not to shove religion down your throat, nor are they to put me on some moral high ground. But it's also important to at least acknowledge that when we removed religion, we had to replace it with something. The erosion of Christianity didn't just impact our churches, it impacted cultural values that held our society together. And furthermore, opened the door in which this revolution could just walk right through. First wave feminists, for the most part, did not seek to erase the differences between men and women. They weren't trying to become men or mock men. Instead, they emphasized complementary roles, that women had a moral and nurturing influence that was necessary to shape society, educate children, and contribute to public life. They believed in the distinct power of womanhood, not in its denial or androgynous dilution. This wave of feminism still upheld marriage, motherhood, and virtue as good and central to a woman's role. At this time, there was no cult of the self. Unlike modern feminism that says, you do you, early feminists operated under a framework of duty, sacrifice, and service, especially in how women should use their influence. They weren't trying to free women from the family or smash the patriarchy. Their goal was often to improve society by improving the conditions of women within their God-given roles. There was no obsession with liberation from responsibility, but a very deep sense of moral obligation. But then it was hijacked. But again, it wasn't born corrupt. As I'm sure you've heard before, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. There came a point where the first wave of feminism was co-opted by occult forces, and this occurred in the early 20th century. Theosophy, goddess worship, and spiritual rebellion started to creep in. Names like Helena Blavatsky and Alice Bailey replaced the moral language of justice with esoteric visions of power. Margaret Sanger, who championed birth control, was very much influenced by these occult ideas. What began as a call for fairness became a seedbed for revolt. And this brings us to the second wave, otherwise known as the Great Inversion. If the first wave sought integration, the second wave demanded demolition. It no longer wanted to refine society. It wanted to reimagine it. The family, gender roles, Christianity, and the very essence of womanhood. You were told that you were more than just a mother. You were told you needed to be free, that love was a trap, that your womb was a burden, that the home was a cage, and the man beside you was your oppressor. But what if I told you these ideas didn't come from nowhere? That they were planted, seeded, and sold, spun by women who themselves were serving a much bigger agenda. Let's take a look at 3 women whose ideas specifically shaped the modern version of womanhood, and ask the question that no one seems to ever ask: what did their version of freedom actually cost us? Betty Friedan lit the match. In her best-selling book, The Feminine Mystique, she calls the suburban housewife's role a comfortable concentration camp. She said that domestic life was a very slow death, that motherhood was an intellectual prison, and that women didn't even realize how miserable they were. So women left the home, not always because they wanted to, but because they were told that they're wasting their potential. Friedan redefined value as visibility. Fulfillment became synonymous with professional status. Homemaking, once revered, was now reframed as shameful. So she offered a new purpose: careerism. She told women to leave the kitchen and enter the boardroom. And again, not because they all wanted to, but because supposedly by staying at home, they were just wasting away. And many women who followed this pathway are now stuck asking themselves, why do I have a resume full of achievements, but feel like something more sacred is missing? Or they resent the men in their lives for the fact that they feel the burden of trying to be everything, yet feeling almost nothing. But Gloria Steinem took it even further. She told women that true power came from detachment: emotional, sexual, and spiritual. Marriage, optional. Children, inconvenient. Abortion, empowerment. And men, oppressors. She famously said that a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle. And what's never discussed is her work in the CIA, or with the CIA, spending her time shaping youth movements and influencing the overall culture. And this is not a conspiracy. Okay, she admitted this.
Gloria, at the festival, you worked for the Independent Research Service.
That's right.
Well, exactly when did your own association with the CIA start, and in what fashion? Did they come to you, or did you go to them?
In 1958, when I came home from India, I discussed with student leaders, past and present, many of them active with the National Student Association.
She didn't liberate women, she redirected them out of the home and into the system. And not towards joy, but towards isolation disguised as independence. And then came Firestone, who indeed took an aim at biology itself. In the dialectic of sex, she declared that pregnancy, barbaric, and the family unit, a form of tyranny. Her vision, ultimately, was quite chilling. Reproduction without women, families without fathers, and bodies without boundaries. Firestone had no goals of equality. She wanted to erase womanhood entirely, to remove pregnancy from the body, to completely abolish the nuclear family, to replace biology with technology. She believed that the only way to be free was to completely escape the female form in itself. And unfortunately, it worked. These ideas fractured women from their own biology. Motherhood was no longer sacred. Sexual restraint or boundaries was seen as a weakness. Virtue became oppression. And the feminine became a costume. If you were told that pain meant oppression, that childbirth was chains, that nurturing or being nurturing is so outdated, you were absorbing Firestone's gospel. I hope by now you can start to see how second wave feminism fused cultural Marxism with spiritual rebellion. It glamorized the self and diminished responsibility. Feminist text praised witchcraft, sexual liberation as empowerment, abortion as a right instead of a moral tragedy, pornography, hookup culture, and promiscuity as markers of freedom, not even disclosing that the things that women did not want to be valued for or degraded down into was indeed the value that now women had to lead with. Steinem herself endorsed feminist occultism. What began as a movement for equality had become a full-blown ideological inversion. This was and is a deliberate psychological operation to destroy modesty, shame, and sexual restraint, especially in young women. By encouraging women to divorce, work, and raise children independently, second wave feminism replaced the husband with the state. Government welfare programs, state-run schools, legal and financial systems that incentivized single motherhood and positioned interdependence on the covenant of marriage as a mistake. And what so many women do not see is that this aligns with globalist interests, not individual fulfillment. Break the family, increase state dependency. And this brings us to part 3, the third wave of feminism. And this is where womanhood started to completely disappear. When truth becomes relative, womanhood becomes undefinable. Rachel Wilson. Third wave feminism didn't just distort womanhood, it dismantled it. No longer is it united around the female experience. It divided itself into identities, grievances, and contradictions. Intersectionality began as a valid critique, but it evolved into this hierarchy of oppression, where being a woman was no longer enough. Instead of seeking unity amongst women, feminism began fracturing into subcategories. You needed to be queer, a person of color, disabled, or non-binary in order to claim moral authority. And biology was soon set out to be erased. Judith Butler's queer theory said that gender is performative, not reality. Soon, being a woman was a feeling, something that anybody could claim. Women's spaces, sports, and even safety were sacrificed at the altar of inclusion. So feminism became competitive and tribal, with victimhood becoming the new form of moral authority. The more oppressed categories a person could claim, the more power they held in the movement itself. And this newfound focal point within the movement moved feminism away from a universal definition of womanhood, and instead created a fractured identity matrix, where being a biological female was no longer the uniting thread. It also encouraged resentment, envy, and perpetual grievance, not cooperation, not uplifting. And as a consequence, feminism began to devour its own. If you did not affirm the ideology, you were labeled a TERF, a bigot, a relic. The category woman became so fluid that anyone could claim it, even biological men. This meant that women's rights, ironically, no longer had a subject. You could not advocate for female-specific issues without being accused of exclusion. And this was the final inversion. Third-wave feminism sided with a worldview that denied objective truth. And in doing so, it sacrificed the very people it claimed to protect, biological women, who are now being erased, displaced, and completely gaslit in the name of inclusion. But it goes even deeper than just that. At the same time, victimhood became virtue. The more identities one could claim, the more power that they held. Words were redefined as violence, no longer judged by intent or truth, but by the emotional response that they triggered. Safe spaces, which were once intended to protect healing, became these ideological bubbles, where dissent was dangerous and curiosity was condemned. Campuses that once encouraged inquiry now have trained their students to catastrophize discomfort, to view a new challenge or being called out on poor behavior as traumatic, and to believe that emotional safety should override open dialogue. And this created a generation that is allergic to confrontation, communication, or alternative perspectives, incapable of a healthy debate, and completely conditioned to collapse under any form of responsibility or pressure. Instead of empowering women, third-wave feminism bred fragility. It exalted hypersensitivity, rewarded grievances, and suppressed resilience. Women were taught that discomfort was danger, that any disagreement, specifically from a man, was harm, and that silence was preferable to the risk of offense. And this carried on as cancel culture replaced growth. Forgiveness was no longer the goal. Shame became a form of currency, and redemption was no longer possible. Even feminists who started to raise questions about this were excommunicated from their own movement, and now feminism had become a religion without redemption. I want to re-emphasize that the intention behind these movements was not inherently harmful. Many were rooted in some form of genuine care. But when care becomes hypervigilance, and when disagreement becomes offense, we risk building a culture that is ill-equipped for the complexity, responsibility, and difficulty of life. They told you that motherhood would make you small, that your body was a burden, that your husband was your captor, that your instincts were oppression or internalized misogyny. But what if that is not true at all? What if your longing for partnership, for family, for meaning is not a weakness, but wisdom? You are not just a body, and you are not just a worker, and you are not just what other people say your potential is. You are the keeper of life, the steward of generations, the emotional center of civilization, the sacred vessel in which all human life enters the world. That's not oppression, that's power, and they knew it, and they feared it. So if you're still here, I thank you, because this conversation isn't an easy one, but it is necessary. This isn't about shame or trying to change your mind. This is about clarity. The mountain that you've been told to climb may lead you somewhere, but it may not be where your heart truly wants to go. The beliefs that were supposed to free you may have isolated you, but it is never too late to return to truth, to choose love, and to reclaim what it is that they tried to erase. Not by hating feminism, not by resenting the past, but by remembering who and what you are. Because a woman's strength isn't found in rejecting her nature, it's in returning to it. Let's begin there. And if you liked this video, then I think you'll really, really like this one. And if not, then respectfully, fuck off.